Imagine this. In just 72 hours, Russia's oil ports, refineries, and railways were set ablaze. Entire tankers crippled, pipelines shut down, and even fuel trains derailed deep inside Russian territory. And none of it came from NATO or Western jets. It all came from Ukraine's drones and covert operatives. For months, Ukraine has been developing the ability to strike deep inside Russia. Not just on the front lines, but right at the heart of Putin's war machine. Now, that power is fully unleashed. Over one single weekend, Ukraine carried out a trio of devastating strikes that exposed just how vulnerable Russia really is. From the Baltic Sea to St. Petersburg and beyond, the world watched Russia endure what can only be described as 3 days of hell. But here's the question. How did Ukraine pull it off? And what does this mean for the future of the war? Stay with us because we're breaking down each strike one by one. First, we start on the night of September 12th, when Ukraine launched its largest drone attack of the entire war, and Russia never saw it coming. Asterisk. Let's dive into Strike 1. The September 12th drone raid. Late on the evening of September 12th, Ukraine launched something Russia had never faced before. A 4-hour swarm of 230 long-range drones. This was Ukraine's largest single-night air raid of the war so far, and it wasn't random chaos. Every drone had a mission. While dozens of drones struck targets across Russia, the most critical were the 30 drones heading straight for the Leningrad region. Their destination? Primorsk oil port, one of Russia's most important energy hubs on the Baltic Sea. At around midnight, wave after wave of Ukrainian drones slammed into the facility. Their main targets? Russia's Shadow Fleet tankers, the secret vessels Moscow uses to dodge sanctions and keep oil money flowing into Putin's war chest. 2 of the biggest ships, the Kusto and the Kalin, were hit hard. Together, they had the capacity to move nearly 1.5 million barrels of oil, and now both were crippled. A third ship, the FOS-4, was also struck. These weren't just ships. They were floating lifelines funding Russia's invasion. For Russia, the message was clear. Even its hidden fleet isn't safe anymore. For Ukraine, it was proof that long-range drone warfare could hit Moscow where it hurts the most, its wallet. But here's the thing, it wasn't just the tankers that burned. Ukraine's drones also forced 2 of Primorsk's 4 oil loading stations to shut down, cutting the port's capacity by half. In a single night, Ukraine didn't just destroy ships. It crippled Russia's entire oil export system in the Baltic. And that's just the beginning. Because what Ukraine uncovered in Primorsk wasn't just about oil. It exposed Russia's Shadow Fleet, the hidden network of tankers that keeps Putin's war alive. Let's break down how this secret fleet works, and why Ukraine just turned it into a target. So what exactly is this so-called Shadow Fleet that Ukraine just struck? Think of it as Russia's secret navy, not warships but oil tankers. Vessels that shouldn't exist on paper, yet keep Putin's war machine fueled with billions of dollars in oil revenue. The fleet is split into 2 parts. First, the Gray Fleet. These ships look legal on the surface. They're registered under foreign flags, often from places like Sierra Leone or the Seychelles, to hide any link to Moscow. On paper, they don't belong to Russia, but in reality, they're Putin's lifelines. Then there's the Dark Fleet. These ships don't even bother pretending. They turn off their tracking systems, jam electronic sensors, and spoof their locations. They slip through international waters like ghosts, impossible to track but loaded with Russian oil. And here's the danger. Many of these ships are old, rusting, and unsafe. European coast guards warn that just one major spill could create an environmental disaster in the Baltic Sea. Yet Russia keeps using them, because without oil money, Putin's war would grind to a halt. That's why Ukraine's September 12th strike was so devastating. By crippling multiple tankers and shutting down 2 of Primorsk's loading stations, Ukraine didn't just sink oil profits. It cut the heart out of Russia's sanctions-dodging scheme. But Ukraine wasn't finished. Just 2 days later, on September 14th, it launched another wave of drones, this time targeting one of Russia's most important oil refineries. And the explosion there sent shockwaves across the entire country. 2 days after crippling Russia's Shadow Fleet, Ukraine struck again, and this time the target was even bigger. On the night of September 14th, Ukraine launched between 80 and 90 drones in a massive swarm. Their destination? The Karisher oil refinery, located just 60 miles southeast of St. Petersburg. Karisher isn't just any refinery. It's one of Russia's largest, capable of producing up to 20 million tons of fuel per year. That's about 6% of Russia's entire refining capacity, and it's the main supplier of gasoline and diesel to St. Petersburg, Russia's second richest city. When Ukraine's drones hit, they struck the refinery's main cracking tower, the heart of the plant that turns crude oil into gasoline. The result? A fireball so powerful it created a mini mushroom cloud that lit up the night sky. Russia's officials scrambled to downplay the damage, claiming the fire was minor and caused by falling drone debris. But satellite images told a different story, showing massive structural damage to fuel tanks and refinery equipment. In reality, the cracking tower was destroyed, leaving the refinery almost useless. This strike wasn't just about hurting the Russian military. It was about pressure. With Karisher offline, fuel shortages weren't just a problem for far-flung Russian regions anymore. Suddenly, even wealthy citizens in St. Petersburg were about to feel the pinch at the gas pump. And that's the genius of Ukraine's strategy. These strikes don't just hit soldiers on the front. They make ordinary Russians feel the pain of war. And as fuel shortages spread, the pressure on Putin only grows. But wait until you hear what happened next. Because Ukraine's third strike didn't just use drones. It was a full-on sabotage operation inside Russia itself. By the time Ukraine's drones lit up the Karisher refinery, the cracks in Russia's fuel system were already showing. And now, those cracks were turning into a full-blown crisis. Back in August, Ukraine had already knocked out 17% of Russia's refining capacity with a series of targeted strikes. That meant about 1.1 million barrels of fuel per day were suddenly offline. The result? Gasoline shortages spreading across the country. At first, it was the remote regions, Crimea, the Russian Far East, small border towns. But soon, the shortages crept closer to Russia's heartland. By September, long lines at gas stations were being reported in Ryazan, Saratov, and Rostov. And the prices? They skyrocketed. Officially, gas was selling at around $3.58 per gallon. But on the black market, desperate drivers were paying as much as $10 a gallon. For a country where the average monthly wage is just over $1,200, that's crushing. And here's why the Karisher strike was such a game-changer. This wasn't about hurting poor, remote regions anymore. This was about St. Petersburg, one of Russia's wealthiest cities, home to elites who felt insulated from the war. Now, those same elites were about to face gas shortages and higher prices. While Russia scrambled to deal with refinery fires, Ukraine opened a brand new front, sabotage on Russian soil. On September 15th, a Russian fuel train carrying over 3,000 tons of diesel suddenly derailed in the Ryazan region, about 120 miles from Moscow. At first, Russian media blamed technical failure. But hours later, Ukraine's security service claimed responsibility, revealing that agents had planted explosives directly on the tracks. The result? Several tanker cars overturned and exploded, sending fire and black smoke into the sky. That fuel wasn't just for civilians. It was bound for military bases supplying Russia's war machine in Ukraine. What's striking here is the shift. Ukraine isn't just launching drones anymore. They're running covert sabotage missions deep inside Russia, striking critical supply lines that Moscow thought were untouchable. And the message was clear: nowhere in Russia is safe. But the real shock came days later, when Ukraine carried out its boldest strike yet, on a target that sits right outside Moscow. Just when Russia thought the fight was far away, Ukraine brought the war to Moscow's doorstep. In mid-September, waves of long-range Ukrainian drones targeted the Russian capital itself. Explosions echoed near Moscow's financial district, shattering windows and skyscrapers, and forcing the Kremlin to temporarily shut down airports. For ordinary Muscovites, this was a wake-up call. The war they'd been watching on TV was suddenly right above their heads. Crowds filmed the drones streaking across the night sky, proof that Ukraine's reach is growing longer, and Russia's defenses are stretched thin. Even though most drones were intercepted, the symbolism was devastating. If Ukraine can hit the power centers of Moscow, nowhere is truly safe. And Ukraine wasn't stopping there, because the next strike didn't just shake confidence. It sent shockwaves through Russia's entire military command. Days after drones rattled Moscow, Ukraine set its sights on something far more dangerous: Russia's military command. On September 18th, a swarm of Ukrainian drones struck near Voronezh, targeting a facility believed to be a regional command center coordinating operations in Ukraine. Witnesses reported massive explosions, followed by a communications blackout across the area. If confirmed, this wasn't just a symbolic strike. It was a direct hit on Russia's ability to control troops and logistics along the front lines. For Ukraine, it's a message. They can reach deep, disrupt command, and leave Russian generals scrambling. For Russia, it's humiliation. Their air defenses, already overworked by non-stop drone attacks, once again failed to protect one of their most sensitive sites. And just when Moscow thought it couldn't get worse, Ukraine delivered another blow, one that hit Russia right in the pocketbook. By late September, Russia wasn't just losing oil and fuel, it was losing billions. Every refinery strike, every derailed train, every blackout pushed Russia's economy closer to the edge. Analysts estimate Ukraine's September attacks alone wiped out hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But it's not just money. Gasoline shortages spread across Russia, with prices on the black market climbing as high as $10 a gallon. Truck drivers couldn't move goods, farmers couldn't fuel tractors, and factories faced delays. Meanwhile, foreign investors were watching closely. The strikes showed that even Russia's wealthiest cities, St. Petersburg, Moscow, weren't safe. That uncertainty scared off money, further weakening the ruble. Ukraine's message was working. If Russia wants to keep this war going, it'll pay for it, in rubles, in fuel, and in the patience of its own people. But the real question remains, where does this strategy lead? And what does it mean for the future of the war itself? Ukraine's September strikes were more than attacks, they were a turning point. From refineries in St. Petersburg to sabotage missions near Moscow to drones shaking the Russian capital itself. Ukraine proved it can hit Russia where it hurts most: fuel, money, and morale. These strikes weren't random. They were calculated pressure points designed to make everyday Russians, not just soldiers, feel the cost of war. And the impact is clear: shortages, soaring prices, and growing cracks inside Putin's fortress. The bigger picture? Ukraine is rewriting modern warfare. Drones, sabotage, and economic warfare are now as important as tanks and missiles. And this playbook will shape conflicts far beyond this war. So what do you think? Will Ukraine's pressure campaign push Russia to the breaking point? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you stayed till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates on this evolving war.